Hello, I'd like to welcome you to our Internet for All webinar series. My name is Sarah Salgado, and I'm a broadband program specialist with the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA. I will be serving as today's moderator. Today, we will discuss the financial portion of the Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure Program application. Middle Mile Program Director Sarah Blue will provide an in-depth look at the Middle Mile funding requirements and grants portal budget information. This includes financial information, the SF424C budget information for construction programs, the budget narrative, detailed budget, and related documents, and lastly, some best practices. We will then move on to our moderated Q&A session. Sarah and I will be joined by our colleagues at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. You can submit your questions at any time by entering them in the Q&A function on your Zoom module. I will now turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, today we are going to talk about the Middle Mile Grant Program. We have talked for a few weeks now that this is a $1 billion grant program, competitive grant program to enable the middle mile infrastructure. Again, some highlights. The middle mile is the backbone of the internet. This is not the last mile. There are a whole bunch of eligible entities like government entities, native entities, utilities, companies, nonprofits, example uses of funds. We're going to dig into that a little bit today because we're talking about budget. And then down here on the bottom, we've got the estimated timeline where the applications are due September 30th by the end of the day. And we anticipate rolling awards to be announced no earlier than March 1st of next year. The program itself, we will make up to $980 million available for federal assistance under this program. We provided guidance in the NOFO that we think that the funding range per project would be about $5 to $100 million, but that's not a hard and firm amount of money. If your project is more or less than that, then that's perfectly acceptable. We would just ask that you explain the need for more or less money. All right, so a reminder here, we are only accepting applications for the Middle Mile Grant Program through the NTIA Grants portal. If you are not familiar with what I'm talking about, please send an email to ngphelpdesk@ntia.gov or middlemile@ntia.gov, and we will do our best to get you sorted out. All applications for this program are due by the end of the day, that is 11:59 p.m. Eastern on September 30th of 2022. Through the portal, must be accepted by 11:59 p.m. on September 30th, 2022. All right, today we're going to focus on the budget, and there's a lot of information to go through. I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible so that we can leave time at the end for questions and answers. We will talk about the funding requirements per the Middle Mile Grant Program. We'll talk about the portal a little bit, and we'll talk about best practices. Here are the funding requirements. Uses of funding, eligible and ineligible. Just a note here, the eligible uses include construction. We've talked about this, engineering, design, permitting. It includes personnel costs. It includes select pre-application expenses of less than $50,000, which are incurred after the NOFO is released and before grant activities. A quick note here, pre-application means the cost that might be associated with putting together your application. I've been asked if engineering or permitting, for example, fall into that pre-application bucket, and the answer is $50,000 or less than $50,000 for costs incurred to assemble your application. Some of the ineligible uses include buying any equipment or services that are covered, and take a look at Section 9 of the Secure and Trusted Communications Network Act. If it's ineligible to support or oppose union organizing, it's ineligible to use the grant funds to build out non-middle mile infrastructure. And again, a reminder, middle mile in this NOFO is defined as that which does not touch the end user household or community anchor institution. Take a look at allowability in 2 CFR Part 200, subpart E for more details on that. Cost share, that's another requirement. No less than 30% cost share. Some of the acceptable types include cash or third-party in-kind contributions. Take a look at 2 CFR Part 200 for a better deep dive into that. Some examples of the third-party in-kind contributions include non-cash donations of property, goods, services, employee services, equipment, supplies, indirect costs, computer hardware, broadband access, access to right-of-way, pole attachments, and all of that. We will probably talk about that more over the upcoming weeks as we have office hours. These are just examples of third-party in-kind contributions. I want to note here that there is the possibility for a tribal government or native entity to request a full or partial waiver of the cost share equipment. Those are the only eligible entities who might request this kind of a waiver. There's an FAQ that's coming out shortly regarding the way that we're going to change the points for any tribal government or native entity who does make that request to waive the match requirement. For those who are providing match, you'll see in the merit review that you get points for how much you're providing in match. You get 5 points in merit if you provide 30 to 40% cost share, 10 points for 41 to 50, and you can get up to 15 points if you do more than 50% cost share. That's huge. In the merit, you get 100 points, and to get 15 points because you're matching more than 50% is a lot of points. I can't stress that enough. Finally, in order to get past the initial review of this program, you must, unless you are a tribal government or native entity, propose a cost share of 30% or greater. All right, we're going to go through what the portal looks like as it relates to the budget information. There are 3 sections in the budget information part of the application on the portal. There's the financial information, there's the standard form 424C, and then there's budget narrative, detailed budget, and related documents. Let's dive into the financial information. There are a few uploads, and I want to talk about this. We will, on the next slide, we'll go into the certification of financial capability, mandatory upload. This pre-letter of credit / legal counsel opinion letter, there's been a lot of questions about this. For this middle mile grant program, we do not require a letter of credit from a bank with your application. What we do want is a letter from a bank who will commit to providing an irrevocable standby letter of credit if your application is awarded. We're calling it a pre-letter. It's like a pre-qualification kind of thing. I would, if I were you, get the bank to, if your project is going to cost $100 million and you know that the letter of credit must be 25%, put a mention in this pre-letter that the bank, from the bank, abiding by NTIA terms, that the bank agrees if your application is selected. In that example, the bank will issue a $25 million letter of credit for you. There's also audited and historical financial statements, which we require to be uploaded with the application. The certification of financial capability, this should come from an officer level employee with the primary applicant. And in this portion, this individual will be attesting to say that as an applicant, you are financially qualified to meet the obligations of this project, that you've got funds available for all costs that will exceed the amount of the grant, then that you will comply with all middle mile grant program requirements and milestones. This is more detail about this pre-letter of credit, and I'm sorry to spend so much time on it, but there have been so many questions because I think that we were, I think that we were a little misleading. It says here letter of credit, and we kept this slide as is because that's letter of credit is the way you're going to see it in the portal. Just a reminder, we do not need you to submit a letter of credit right now with the application. If you are selected for award, you will submit the letter of credit then. What we need with this application is a letter from a bank, call it a pre-qualify or pre-letter, whereby the bank says, I, bank, abide by NTIA terms, and I agree I am going to issue a letter of credit, list the amount of 25% of the amount of funding being requested for this applicant. If you have any questions about that, please join our office hours that are coming up or send us an email at middlemile@ntia.gov. let's go. Oh, and I will say one more thing. I'm so sorry that in the NOFO, it also says that we will that NTIA will post a template of this letter of credit. And we do have that. We haven't posted it yet because we're not at that award point where we are asking people for letters of credit, but we do have that, and it will be posted on our website, internetforall.gov, shortly. Audited financial statements. Tons of good questions have been coming in. We've got all kinds of eligible entities, very large organizations, very small organizations, companies who've been purchasing other companies throughout the years. What kind of financial statements are we looking for? And so these next two slides talk about that. The NOFO does ask for audited financial statements. What we would like to see is the last 3 fiscal years where you've been audited by an independent certified public accountant. And if that is not available, sometimes it's not, then that you submit unaudited financial statements from the 3 prior years. And here is where we are asking you to also upload historical financial statements that might be revenue, like asset information, other kinds of financial information from the 3 prior years. All of that is required in the portal. Thank you. Okay, next thing, when we get into the budget information of the portal, you will spend a lot of time on your standard form 424C, which is budget information for construction. Let's dig into that a little bit. Here's the 424C. If you do a Google search for SF 424C, you will find templates, and I strongly suggest that it's a good practice to download a 424C offline somewhere so that you can become familiar with what kind of information we're going to be asking for. We have built this 424C into the portal, so all you're going to have to do is, ideally, if you've printed up your 424 somewhere else, your 424C, then you can just put those numbers into the portal. And that's what we're going to walk through really quickly here. On the left side here, you will see the cost classifications that are listed on the 424C. Administrative, construction, equipment, there's a subtotal, there's contingency line item. These cost classifications, and then there are definitions over here on the right. You will notice that on the 420, the cost classifications on 424C are consistent with the budget narrative template that you will download from us, as well as the detailed budget justification. We're looking for consistency in the cost classification and also in the cost. So be mindful of that as you complete this information. This is what the portal will look like, but you won't have red boxes. Here in the 424C, we're looking for the high level administrative and legal expenses, for example, in total cost item number 1. And later on in the detailed budget justification is where you'll provide more details. But I think that this is pretty straightforward. You're going to put in your total for each of these categories into these fields. This is where on the 424C, you will indicate how much how much do you need the federal government to contribute to your project? And so kind of the inverse of what we've been talking about. We've been asking everybody to provide a match of 30% or greater. Here, the question is, for those of you who are less familiar, I was certainly less familiar with the 424C not too long ago. This federal assistance requested cannot be greater than 70%. And then there will be a calculation on total allowable costs. Once you have completed your 424C, then you'll get a pop-up in the grants portal, which will give you a view, the PDF view of what you have just completed. I would suggest that you download a copy and keep this for your records once that happens. All right, now in the portal, we're going to get to the budget narrative, detailed budget justification, and related documents. All right, so we're going to, in the next couple of slides, go into further detail on the budget narrative, the budget justification, and related documents. But just a quick highlight here that these templates, the budget narrative, the detailed budget justification, and the pro forma, these are templates that we have made available for you, and we would strongly suggest that you use. They're available on the internetforall.gov website. Go to the zip file, and they are there for you. The budget narrative, a few minutes ago, when we talked about the standard form 424C, we talked about, if you remember, on the left side of the screen were the cost categories. And so take a look at over here in this little example here. And again, this is available for you on our internetforall.gov website. For example, the first item, if you recall, was administrative and legal expenses. That is what you're going to see in this budget narrative. So what we are asking you to do is, if you put in your 424C that administrative and legal expenses were going to add up to $20,000, that was the total. Here in this budget narrative, we want you to say, okay, number one, administrative and legal expenses. I said it was going to cost $20,000, and here's why. I've got 3 people working on this project. They're each making so much money, and then I also have to pay for my lawyers. So we're looking for that total amount, and we're looking for your explanation of how you arrived at these costs to get up to the 20,000. Not looking for blanket, just, it's going to cost me 20,000 for administrative and legal. We're looking for the details. This is a Word file, and so you'll be able to download that template, put in your details, and then upload it to the grants portal. Here, and again, we do provide you with examples in the template that we've provided that just kind of breaks down. In this example, we tried to be, because we're tech agnostic and we're accepting everything in the middle mile grant program, talking about boring as an example, boring as in the construction, not boring Sarah. If the description of the construction cost is boring, we want to know what's the unit, and describe it there. What's the unit cost? How many units are, and then finally what the total cost. We're looking for that level of detail. We don't want you to just come to us and say, I need $30 million to buy wireless towers. We want you to break down for us in this narrative. Here's my item in construction. Here's the unit basis, the cost, how many of those that we're going to need, and then the total cost. Detailed budget justification spreadsheet. This is a lot, but what we're trying, again, you're going to, the same administrative and legal expenses that we talked about a few minutes ago, adding up to $20,000, you're going to break down by line item. What you put into your budget narrative will match what you put into the detailed budget justification here. And you will also have the opportunity, I talk with my hands, I'm sorry. You will also have the opportunity, so you'll recall unit type, cost, number of units, total cost. You'll have the opportunity to indicate if any of these services or items that you listed in the budget narrative are going to be used for match, either as a cash or in-kind match or something like that. So that's the way that the detailed budget justification works out. It will match what you've provided. The details that you've provided in your budget narrative are going to line up down here and across the board. If you want to use if your lawyers would like to do pro bono work and that's going to be your match, then this is where you would indicate that. The pro forma, we have the template on our website to use our pro forma. What we're looking for here is that at the end of this project, and that's another question I've been asked, is financials, okay, you can provide for your entire corporate organization, but the pro forma, we want to know that this project that you're proposing is going to be sustainable. And so we've asked for 8 years. If it's going to take more than 8 years until you are EBITDA not negative, carry it out. Go as many years as you need to, but use this format, please. I also want to highlight that we don't want you to double count your depreciation expense. In expenses, it says middle mile grant total costs from 424. Make sure that your 424 is not including the depreciation costs of the equipment, because you are going to be asked here, as you can see, for depreciation as a line below the EBITDA. There's a question if there is additional funding, and there have been a lot of people who've been asking if I'm applying for another grant program, is that a bad thing? There's no such thing as a bad thing except hiding the facts from us. Be transparent, tell us what's going on. If you may not use other sources of federal funding as match for this program, but if you are getting if there is other funding that's available that you're using for this, tell us. Don't wait for me to read it in Google or something like that. Because we're giving you the opportunity to disclose as much as you can about this project that's near and dear to your heart, why you want to build Middle Mile. So talk about, if you've got anything else that is going to help fund this project, let us know and describe it here, please. And very quickly, we'll go over a few best practices. Common mistakes. I want everybody to know that when we go through the initial review, we're going to cure the heck out of everything. And if you get cured, it's not a bad thing. But some of the things that you'll get cured for is if you don't show that you're meeting 30%, if your total project costs are inconsistent across the 424C and the budget narrative and the detailed budget justification. If your costs are not allowable or reasonable, we're going to come back to you and we're going to ask you to explain, to fix, whatever it is. Remember, in initial review, you've got just a couple of days for your authorized representative to respond to us 100%. So be mindful of these mistakes, know that curing will fix a lot of these and that you've got a limited amount of time to be responsive to that initial curing request. Some of the best practices, make sure that you've got your certification of financial capability uploaded. This pre-letter of credit, not a letter of credit required right now. We're looking for a commitment from a bank who will abide by NTIA terms and plan and commit to issuing you a letter of credit. Tell us what amount if you are selected. You've got your financial statements. Make sure, I cannot stress enough, your 424C, the budget narrative, the detailed budget justification, make sure that those numbers and items are consistent across the board. And go on in the pro forma as long as you need to show that this project is going to be sustainable. Finally, know these CFRs, like 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart E, and this 48 CFR. Make sure that your budget is consistent. And again, come to us if you have questions. We cannot answer questions specifically about your application, but we're trying to encourage strong applications. So as much as we can answer your questions about these forms, please, we'll be doing office hours shortly, and we'll also respond to middlemile.nta.gov. And again, here are resources. If you go to the internetforall.gov website, go to webinars and you will see what I'm talking about. I keep talking about office hours. That's kind of a big deal. Go to the webinars. It's going to list over the next, I think, almost 6 weeks. We're going to be doing twice a week, 1 hour open mic where we're going to take your questions and answer things as best as we can. Talk to your state or territory, engage with them as they're planning their own, how they're going to bring high-speed internet to all residents. Submit your questions to middlemile.nta.gov and keep on joining our webinars. Thank you for being here today, and I look forward to answering some of your questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. We will now move on to the Q&A portion. So in addition to Sarah, I'd like to welcome Ming Q. Ming is a grants officer joining us today from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, our colleague at NIST. Ming is going to partner today with Sarah Blue to answer your questions. And webinar participants, thank you for joining. We would like to ask that you continue to ask your questions within the Q&A function. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a Q&A box to submit your questions. So please do that in the box and not in the chat. We don't want to miss them. We'll try to go through and answer as many questions as we can. If there's anything we're unable to answer, just as Sarah mentioned, you're all welcome to join our Middle Mile office hours that will start next week on August 17th and run throughout the end of September. To register, you may visit broadbandusa.ntia.doc.gov and click on upcoming events to register. We always encourage you to check out our website resources. Our third round of Middle Mile FAQs is underway and should be available very, very soon. And lastly, you may always continue to send questions to middlemile@nta.gov. So Sarah and Ming, let's get started. All right. Sarah, would you be able to go over the point distribution for the match portion?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Sarah. Before I do, I just want to point out that we do have two websites. When I mentioned the office hours, I mentioned internetforall.gov because that's easier for me to rattle off the top of my head. But Sarah's absolutely right. You can also go to Broadband USA, which has historically been where NTIA has posted a lot of its grants program information. So if you go there, either case under webinars, you can navigate a little bit and you will find that information. So Broadband USA or Internet for All. On the, it's a great question about the match amount. So the way that the merit score breaks down, it's that if you provide more than 30%, well, actually, if you provide between 30 and 40%, that you get 5 points. If you provide 41 points to 50 points, you get 10 points. And if you do, well, excuse me, I misread. Sorry, I didn't misread, I misspoke. If you go between 30 and 40 points, you get 5. If you go between 41 and 50, that's where you get 10 points. And if you get more than 50%, that's when you get 15 points.
Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
And on the realm of talking about cash match, so if an applicant is using cash match in lieu of in-kind contributions, are the matches due monthly or per invoice submitted? You being on the
sure, yeah, I can take that question. I can take the question. Thank you for the quick question. It's a very great quick question. So generally for non-federal cost share, regardless of in-kind or cash contribution, the non-federal cost share, whether cash or in-kind, is generally pay out at the same general rate as the federal share is drawdown. So except that if there's a sufficient documentation where there is a slight deviation per year drawdown is acceptable, but as long as the non-federal cost share is met at the end of the award. But the I guess the answer to the question is that the drawdown should be in the general rate that the federal fund is drawn down. So it does not have to be a monthly. You are not required to draw down funds monthly, but you're not supposed to draw down funds that have a cash on hand more than 30 days. So you got time your drawdown based on your need on the expenses that is anticipated within a maximum of 30 days. Hope to answer the question.
So, Ming, can I just clarify a little bit? So for example, if let's say that an eligible entity was providing its costs of construction as a match. And so, when an applicant is selected for award, then there's going to be a period of time where we work out NEPA and permitting and design engineering and all that stuff. There's a bunch of work that happens before construction actually occurs. So as the if they're providing that in-kind match as a construction service, then like you said, it would just, if it's according to the timeline narrative and the timeline that's being proposed with the application, if construction begins in month 25, it's in month 25 that we would expect to see that construction in-kind match being contributed to the project, right?
Correct, yes. So generally, if there's a difference between a federal funds expend versus the non-federal cost share, for example, your example gave it like the first couple of months there may not be any construction activity that where the in-kind is coming in, then obviously the documentation of your proposal would document when where the in-kind is actually coming from and justifies income in your justification. So as long as there's sufficient documentation demonstrated, the plan to commit the cash or in-kind contribution, that would be sufficient as documentation for the drawdown ratio.
Thank you.
Thank you.